Now, what I have laid out here is I'm not going to list any of the dialogue that goes on in the early Jewish liturgy, nor be very detailed in it. I'm just trying to give a broad overview, and then how that transitions into the early Christian liturgy, and how they all have apostolic origins. The reason why I'm presenting it like this and not using the textbook for this particular situation is I'm trying to answer for you the questions that I had. I'm just suspecting that you had many of the same questions. So I'll be very honest and sincere with you that when I was your age, it wasn't that I had a problem with what was happening at Mass, but I would never have been able to tell you anything about the origins of it. If you would have pressed me and said, well, how did the Catholic Church determine what happens at Mass, I probably would have thought people in Rome figured it out. Not like being a smart aleck, but I would have probably thought that bishops and cardinals over the years thought, what should we do? How should we do this? Almost like you're putting together a play, because I had no other idea. I also was questioned when I was younger by a couple of friends who were evangelicals, who said, you know, the Catholic Church is so ritualistic and formal, and they made it that way. It wasn't like that. In the beginning, you'll see people that just went out into the streets and the marketplaces and they talked about God, and they got together and they sang and they preached. And the Catholic Church made it formal, and they said, we're trying to bring back what was originally there. Okay, well, that's challenging to me as a young Catholic, because one, if that's true, then we made everything very formal. But the fact of the matter was, I had no idea. So I just listened. I wasn't there to win an argument, but it did make me, at least by God's grace, go back and look things up. And I thought to myself, when I was contemplating leaving the Catholic Church, that I shouldn't leave something that I do not believe. I thought that would be like, I'd be like an idiot. You know, who would leave something they don't understand? That's just something that you do if you don't think. But I wanted to learn more about it before I made a decision. I was thinking to myself, I'd make an informed decision. Well, here I am. Oh, you know, I didn't tell the other periods this, but it's kind of funny. In our yearbooks, you know, they were nothing like these modern yearbooks. You just had your picture, your name, what clubs you were in, and then, you know, what you wanted to be when you grow up. So my friend put down a shepherd, and as a joke, I put down theologian. As a joke. I mean, it's funny. He's not a shepherd, by the way, but he plays guitar for, he's actually in a Beatles clone band out in Vegas. He flies all over the country. He's George Harrison in the Beatles. He's a very good musician. Anyway, so this, I'm guessing that you had many of the same questions I did, and I'm hoping that if you do, that this at least helps answer those, okay? And what I found when I was doing this is oftentimes the clues that I found were subtle, and they may not appear as though they're very convincing or certainly not overwhelming, but yet they had resonance with me. So let me share with this how I walk through this. You don't need to write this down. There's going to be two things that you'll need to know about this. First off, most of you know the story of Cain and Abel, all right? So you have Adam and Eve. They conceived and bore Cain, and then again they conceived and bore Abel. Abel was the keeper of sheep, so Abel was the shepherd, and Cain was a farmer, we'll say, okay? That's really the extent of what we know about them. But the very next line says, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering, and so on and so on. Okay, I have to share with you that stopped me. Remember I tell you how comedians, artists, and philosophers, you know, and I'm at least two of those, you know, try to look for things, or just happen by chance to look for stuff that's a little more divergent. And I thought, wait, it just said in the course of time, they brought forth an offering. So what that means is nobody told them to do it. There was no commandments. God didn't say, you every day or whatever will bring me an offering. So what that tells me, and I'm trying to be very modest, is that there must be something innate in us that wants to offer sacrifice. Do you know what innate means? There's something, it's natural for us to offer sacrifice. That's the first thing you'll need to know. It's natural for us to offer sacrifice. And I think we see that, right? In other words, nobody really feels fulfilled until they give of themselves in some significant way. Sometimes we don't do it well. But nonetheless, we're trying to fulfill an urge that we haven't quite put our finger on. But it's the same with us eating and drinking. Nobody tells you to eat or drink. I don't think anybody needs to tell us that the only way to find fulfillment is the gift of ourselves. I think that's what this is saying here. That's what I got out of it. Okay, then it goes on after saying that Abel brought the firstlings of his flock and their fat portions, then this is like a rather, it's an enigma here. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. In other words, God liked Abel's and he didn't like Cain's. And we don't know why. Sometimes, in movies, like if you watch a movie this Easter, when they shows about, the religious shows come on, you'll see Abel and Cain, and you'll actually see Cain like keeping some of his sacrifice off to the side. Because they're trying to figure out why did God, which seems arbitrarily, like one and not the other. Some people in past classes said, well, could it be that Cain didn't have his whole heart in it? Yeah, it could be. But the reality is we don't know. Okay? If we can only work with what we see here, I can only make a judgment on what information I have. So what's the second thing you need to know? For whatever reason, God prefers some sacrifices over others. I think that's pretty modest. But it's also pretty important. If it's something innate in us where we naturally want to sacrifice ourselves, then we also have to accept that for whatever reason, he accepts others more so than others. Which means that no matter what we think, so what type of sacrifice are we doing in liturgy, and if we still think we can pray at home and do these things, can we still make the argument that they're all the same? I don't think so, okay? It's modest, I know, but it's what I came up with. The next thing is, and this is a very, very broad overview, the ancient Israelites, they were in their homeland, and they had a temple. Then they were exiled, known as the Babylonian exile, and then afterwards they were brought back to their homeland. So there's this before, during, and after exile. So without being overly descriptive of what's going on, let me give you at least a sense of it. Before exile, they would bring grains and animals and this is what they would sacrifice, okay, at the temple. So we read this in Deuteronomy. Take heed that you do not offer your burnt offerings at every place that you see, but the place which the Lord will choose. There you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all I am commanding you. Even within that sentence, look, do not offer your burnt offerings at every place that you see, but only at the place the Lord will choose. So we also know that he has a preference of where. Now, you might be starting thinking, well, so what? Well, Christianity and Judaism is a revelatory religion. We don't do what we think makes sense. We do what God has asked us to do. So if God says, I would like you to make sacrifices, and I'd like you to do it in a certain place, that's good enough for us. Okay? Nonetheless, sacrifices of animals, grains, etc. During exile, there simply was no temple. If there was no temple, they couldn't make animal sacrifices. So what was it that they did? Hosea said, we will render the fruit of our lips. So when you read something like they made sacrifices of bulls with their lips, it's an idiom. Okay? All they're saying is, we can't physically sacrifice anything. So we will do it with our lips. What they're saying is, we'll bring you praise. Okay? That's really what they mean. But nonetheless, do you see, they didn't just say, well, we don't have a temple. He's not going to hold this against us. Let's continue to sacrifice. No, God was pretty, square with them. And he said, no, only in certain places, not every place you see. So they had to wait. So when they were back then in their homeland, after exile, now we see what would be more familiar to us as a liturgy. We see that they start readings from the Torah, singing the Psalms. There are blessings involved. And the sacrifices are reinstated at the temple. This was Jesus and the apostles. So I'm already starting to see that my friend who told me, in the early church, they didn't have anything formal like you have. You Catholics. All what they had was they would get together and they would sing and they would praise and they would listen to somebody preach to them. There's no historical evidence for that. Jews today are liturgical. Ancient Jews are liturgical. Christians were not yet called Christians. They were simply Jews. Therefore, they were liturgical. So what we experience today is a transition from this. So I think at this point I started to realize my friend was in error. what he said sounded convincing. It sounded like we took something simple and made it complex. But in reality, it was never complex. It was simply always a ritual. They did away with the ritual. That was my conclusion. So then in the Christian liturgy, Christ and his disciples as a Jew participated in it. So Christ went to synagogue. The synagogue was pretty much what they, to a certain degree, what is understood today. There's a liturgy and it's ritualistic. And it was the only way that Jews and early Christians connected with their God. Nobody would have thought you could have been part of Christianity by being separate from it, by staying home. As if nobody says you can be part of, and you could be a secular Jew, but you can't be a religious Orthodox Jew and remain apart from the community. All right? So what happens is they took the same readings from the Torah, they took the blessings, they added the writings of the apostles, and instead of the continual sacrifices they had to do in temple, they replaced it with Christ's sacrifice, which historically happened once, but was anamnesis, being made present for anybody who was there in all subsequent generations. So I read about one convert from Judaism to Catholicism, and she said when she went to her first Catholic liturgy, she felt like she was at synagogue, only was centered around this man, Jesus. Otherwise, she felt very comfortable there. So again, I'm thinking, my friend who said this is how evangelicals worship, how they did in the early church, I'm starting to find issues with that. Historical issues. All right. On the surface, this doesn't seem right, because I did tell you that man is sanctified during liturgy. So in that sense, yes, it has something to do with us. But in the strict sense, it's not about us. One of my professors, who was a liturgist that taught me, he's actually a priest in the Philadelphia Archdiocese. He's at Rittenhouse Square. He said a couple came out of Mass one day, and he was the celebrant, so they greeted him outside. They said, "Hey, Father Mackel, we got nothing out of Mass today." And he said, "Good, maybe you're starting to get it. It's not about you. It's about Christ. And it's centered on that." I mean, if you think about it, if you would be going as a young person with your parents to one of the burnt offerings in the temple before Christianity, and then you told your parents, "I got nothing out of that burnt offering," they would look at you kind of strange. Well, that really wasn't about you. So what is it that, why is it that you think you should have got something out of it? Okay? That's what I want to address. This isn't really a theological point, but it has a theological component. Worship, work, and play. These are really three things that we do. And for the most part, up until modern times, people worshipped at worship. They worked at work, and during play, they expected to have play and leisure. We've kind of muddled this. And the fact that we've muddled it and we think that it's normal affects how we understand liturgy. That's why I'm bringing it up. Let me say this. Rather than worship at worship, we play at worship today. At least we expect to. We expect to be entertained. We expect, to come out feeling good. We expect it to be something that's attractive. Those are qualities that we always looked at in our play and leisure, but today we look at them in our worship. Work, well, work used to be hard for the most part, but nonetheless, work was work. It brought man dignity, and it also helped sustain them. But now, for the most part, people worship at work. That's their main focus in life. Oftentimes, people identify themselves by what they do, not who they are. So instead of work simply sustaining us and bringing us dignity, it becomes the thing where we put all our time and energy into. In other words, we've turned work into worship. And as far as play, the Catholic Church is very clear that play and sports are very important. Why? Well, because for one, they allow you to play out certain scenarios in life with little to no repercussions. I mean, in other words, there's teamwork issues and there's other, relational issues that you can work out in football, and the worst case scenario is that you don't win the game. That's a learning atmosphere. But now, you think of what we do in our play. It requires, in other words, we work at our play. It requires more physical exertion than we do anywhere else. To the point where we have how many fitness places pop up all over the place. To the fact where, you think of between rock climbing, biking, skateboarding, paintball, you name it, the amount of money and time that you can invest in this. Think what it's like to even be in high school sports. When I was in high school, which was only 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, 9th grade was junior high, you could actually start playing football in 10th or 11th grade and you had a chance to start, Today, you've probably been in a football camp since you were in 3rd or 4th grade. Same thing with soccer, same thing with volleyball, to the point where I've had students, by the time they're seniors, say, I am so sick of this sport because I've been doing it for 8 or 9 years. That's a shame. I know my one daughter, she played volleyball for Nerlenko. Oh, she begged and begged, I want to go into this club sport. I said, well, how much is it? $600. I almost died. $600. I mean, growing up, it wouldn't matter if it was 20 bucks. I grew up with no money. If I'd have said, Mom, I'd like to go do this, how much is it? Well, let's say it's 50 bucks. First of all, they would wonder, why are you even asking? They'd have said, get away. And then, we found the money with friends and relatives or whatever, and we paid for it, and then I look at the schedule. They're playing in Manassas, Virginia. They're playing in Ohio. I'm like, this is 9th grade. We're treating these kids like they're going into the Olympics. Anyway, it's how hard we work at this. So my whole point is this. We started playing at worship, we started worshiping at work, and we started working at play. We had them all muddled, which means we no longer really understand what worship is. So therefore, for us, it's more of entertainment and leisure. And if we don't get that entertainment and leisure at our worship, then we don't see any interest or any relevance. That's why I bring it up, okay? That's part of our modern world. Okay, the last thing, and then we're done, was this.
Mrs. Case, please call the main office.
We have writings that go all the way back to the apostolic times. The last book in the Bible was written in 100 AD. We have apostolic writings from like 75, 80 AD. This is the Apology of St. Justin Martyr. This is in 155 AD. It's barely 50 years after the last writing. It's called an apology. You don't need to know this, not because they're saying they're sorry. Apology means to explain, right, or to defend. So somebody had asked him, what is it that the Christians do? So he's going to tell them. So I'll narrate as we go. It's a video, but it's just text, all right? And tomorrow, as a school, we're going to be celebrating Mass. I want you to ask yourself how similar this seems to the Mass that we'll be celebrating tomorrow, the ones you celebrated in the past, all right? First off, they meet on Sundays. Not Saturdays, not Tuesdays. That's significant. No matter where you live, you come to one place. You don't just stay home and worship. They read the memoirs of the apostles, the Gospels, the writings of the prophets, the epistles. When the reader has ceased, the president, that's the priest, he instructs everybody. That's the homily. Then after the homily, we all stand up and begin our prayers. We do that. When the prayer is ended, bread, wine, and water are brought up. That's the offertory. Then the priest offers prayers and thanksgiving over these gifts. And all of us assent by saying amen. It's the great amen. And then they bring the communion to everybody. Anybody, let's see, we participate. See, that's a participation. We participate in what was given us. That's sacrifice. If you weren't there, then the deacons would bring it to you. We still do that. We call this food Eucharist. It's not a memorial. It's not, hey, we remember. You're not allowed to partake of this unless you believe in it. So it's not open to all. And you have to be baptized. If you're not baptized and you don't agree with this, don't present yourself. You're baptized to regenerate the soul and join with Christ. It's not common bread and drink. In other words, we know that it looks like bread and wine. But didn't Jesus look like a man, and yet he was God? It really is the flesh and blood. And it's for what? Our own salvation. I mean, I can be saved by eating this? Yes. We also been taught the food which is blessed by his prayer of his word. That too is blood and flesh. By transmutation, we use the word transubstantiation. They say transmutation. It becomes the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Now, we get this from the apostles. Okay? They didn't make it up. We're just delivering what they told us. Jesus took the bread, and after he had given thanks, he says, "This do in remembrance of me," anamnesis. All right? And after that, he then took the cup, and after giving thanks, you'll hear Father say this tomorrow. "This is my blood," and he gave it to them alone. So, that doesn't line up with what I understand as a modern evangelical service. So once I started reading these, and these are available to anybody. I mean, this is not like some hidden stuff that's in the basement of the Library of the Vatican no one's allowed to see. You can go and Google that, right? So once I read that, I realized what I'm doing in the Catholic Mass has been going on since the time of the apostles. So when I did start researching when did that type of evangelical worship start, it was the late 1800s, early 1900s. Tent revivals. If anybody goes to Steubenville, you know what that's about. You sing songs, you hear speaking. That's what they used to do at tent revivals. They picked up the format from tent revivals. So really, my friend who was accusing me of making it formal, and he said that they've been doing it since the time of Christ, his history was barely 100 years old. Mine, I could trace back at least to 150 AD, and even then, we know that wasn't the beginning of it. You notice that it says we meet on Sundays. If there's a church that says we are a Bible-only church, we do nothing that's not in the Bible, if they meet on Sundays, that's the first question you should have for them. Where did you come up with that one? Because there's nowhere in the Bible that says to meet on Sundays. If you don't think that's true, go ask the Seventh-day Adventists. They meet on Saturdays, precisely because the Bible doesn't say to meet on Sundays. If you ask the Seventh-day Adventists, why is it that the churches meet on Sundays? The Catholics did that. That's what I was told, and I told them, I agree, we did. The early church changed it from Saturday to Sunday, because that's the day the Lord rose. If we seem exclusionary, that we won't allow anybody that's not baptized or believes like us to partake of the Eucharist, you can't get mad at us. This goes back to ancient times, right? So that's a real brief overview, but in the end, my questions were answered. I realized that it wasn't just some guys in Rome that were putting this together as they were constructing a play. This is something the apostles gave us. And I can get a feel for that because Jesus himself was liturgical. He met in synagogue. Even the early Christians, when they weren't called Christians, still met in synagogue, which meant they were very comfortable with ritual. It was always centered on a sacrifice. The only difference is rather than multiple sacrifices of grain and animals, it became Christ's sacrifice, which historically happened once, but because of our understanding of anamnesis, can be made present for us in all subsequent generations. All right? So whether or not that adds anything to your understanding of Mass and the apostolic origins of it, that's what got me on my road to saying, no, I think I'm where I should be. All right? Any questions? All right.